Hello, Wano community. After I've been responding to some contests and done a little vinyl update, it's time to go back to showing uh, different styles of my collection. And I've been showing a lot of 80s previously. 80s house music, 80s indies music, 80s synth and new wave music. And I thought I was going to show some 80s pop music overall. And It's interesting how through the years I've been listening to the 80s ever since the 80s ended. Or should I've been continuing listening to the 80s since it ended. And Here in Sweden it hasn't been easy because in Sweden we have a way to feel a bit ashamed of past decades in music, especially the 80s. So during the 90s, I remember it wasn't all too easy to collect 80s records without getting a comment like, you realize that it's the 90s, or in some way getting a little lecture of how bad the 80s was in politics, whatever that has anything to do with the music. But anyway, I have always stood against the stream and love the 80s and will always do. I'm going to start right away with showing some of my absolute favorite records from the 80s. And this is a band that I discovered from the very first song I heard. This is a British band, Drum Theatre, and their debut album Everyman. Drum Theatre I heard the first time in their breakthrough song here in Sweden, Living in the Past, who I thought was a marvelous song even back then. I really love the drums and the production. And I bought this album around 1990, and I loved it. I loved it from the beginning when I heard this album. I really thought it was a great album. The follow-up single to Living in the Past, Home is Where the Heart is a little what this album sounds like. Pop with a little soul in it and great funky production, and I really love this album. It's both exotic and special and sounds very great. I really love the production. The next album is an album that has been with me through most of my life. It's definitely one of my absolute favorite records ever. I heard it the first time in my uncle's house in Örnsköldsvik in 1986, and I got a cassette copy of it and listened to it about 100 times. And definitely I can hear it still today without ever getting tired of it. I'm talking about Nick Kershaw's The Riddle. I am a huge fan of Nick Kershaw and his music. I love his voice. I love his lyrics. I love his sense of his compositions, and he's a great musician. And this album is very relaxing. It's definitely an album that breathes summer for me. I don't know how many that will agree with me on that point, but it's really some of the songs like Wild Horses and Roses are, in my opinion, so relaxing that you can lay in the fields, in the open fields somewhere in the country on a blanket and just have the sun and in your face and the wind. Feel a little wind in your face, and then listen to this one and you realize the summer is awesome. So this is a fantastic, relaxing album. I really love this one. City of Angels, highly recommended song, definitely one of the best songs ever. Another 80s summer album for me is this one. It's also one of my absolute favorites records of all time. Scritti Politti, Cupid and Psyche 85. I really like Scritti Politti, and especially I like R.F. Martin's production in this one. R.F. Martin, marvelous 80s producer who also produced From Luxury to Heartache from Culture Club, and also some of the Chaka Khan's albums in the 80s. This album has many tracks, and all of them are, in my opinion, breathing summer feelings, especially songs like Hypnotized and Small Talk. Small Talk, who was one of the songs that got me to be a pop nerd in the 80s. And marvelous singles also. I love songs like Perfect Way, great single. Some weird Would Pray Like Aretha Franklin, also great song. Great album, fantastic, well made, awesome production. Band that I could have shown in my video when I showed Synth New Wave was Tears for Fears, but I thought to myself that there was one album that I wanted to show more than anything else, and that album isn't one of the most synthiest, is that the word? The album that sounds most synth pop, and it is this album, so I decided to put them in 80s pop music. I'm talking of The Seeds of Love from 1989. Fantastic album. They took many years of doing this album. It costed a lot of money, and it was definitely worth all the money and all the time, because it's so well made. Phil Collins is also guest playing here. You hear Olita Adams in Woman in Chains. Definitely a well made album. Advice for the Young at Heart, great single, and of course Standing in the Corner of the Third World and Year of the Knife, awesome melodies. But especially, of course, Sowing the Seeds of Love, the single, definitely is one of the best songs ever. It's never boring, it's so unpredictable, you never know. If you haven't heard the song before, you never know where it's going to end. Because it takes new ways in the melody all the time. It's really definitely one of the best well-made songs ever. So this album is, in my opinion, a masterpiece. Another band that I really love, and that I've done so for many years, is Level 42. The British jazz funk band that was very popular in the mid-80s, but I love them no matter year we're talking about them. You can say that there are practically two different kinds of Level 42 sounds. You have the earlier one from the beginning all the way to the mid-80s that are more funkier, more solos, and maybe more bass and so on, and a little less melodies and strong melodies. And you have also the more commercial years after Lessons in Love from 1986 and then forward, that I also like very much, because I like Mark King's voice, I like his bass, he's magnificent, maybe one of the best bass players ever. I like the production, fantastic groovy beats. I really love everything about Level 42. I could have shown Running in the Family, because that album is also like Nick Kershaw's album and Spirit Police album, one of the best albums ever. But it's also the most normal one, so I thought that I was going to be a little more unusual, so I picked this one. This is the debut album from 1981. The self-titled debut album, and this is definitely not an album filled with hit songs. It's not songs made for the hit charts, but still it's a very well-made album. It's very funky, great production, and especially I love the song, the single Love Games. Also might be one of the best Level 42 songs ever. I remember working in a store actually many years ago. I thought it was 6-7 years ago, and I was picking up food on shelves, and it was kind of boring job. But the thing that actually saved it was that they had a Dutch web radio channel that was playing all over the store. And in that Dutch web radio channel, all of a sudden you could hear Level 42 songs, both more normal songs from Running in the Family album, but also Love Games. And you can imagine how happy I was to actually hear Love Games and other Level 42 songs when I was doing that job. But this album I bought at a record fair, and definitely one of the best Level 42 albums right after Running in the Family. Definitely a masterpiece also. Another artist that I also have liked through most of my life is Madonna. It's been a while now since I heard her actually. Uh, I think Madonna as of today is definitely not in her prime. She hasn't been it for at least for the entire past decade. Uh, her songs with French producer Mervet are very stale, very boring. Her James Bond movie song, Die Another Day, is perhaps one of the worst James Bond movie tracks ever. And maybe one of the worst Madonna tracks ever. At least I thought so until I heard her duet with Justin Timberlake, who I thought was horrible. The last, I liked Confessions on a Dance Floor. I like that one. That is the best Madonna album during from 2000 and forward. But the last really great Madonna album was Ray of Light 99, who I definitely like very, very much. It's an autumn 90s album. But I'm going to take you back, of course, to the 80s, when Madonna was at her best, of course. I like Madonna for her pop melodies. I like her I like her as a live performer, but her the thing about her being a fashion icon and all that kind of stuff doesn't interest me one bit. But she's an awesome artist. She's always have produced and done great melodies and so on. And I could have picked any Madonna album, Like a Virgin, fantastic album with a lot of childhood memories. But this one is perhaps the Madonna album that I have the most childhood memories from. True Blue from 1986. I remember from the beginning in around 1985, 86, 87, I didn't like Madonna all that much. I thought it was kind of girlish music. But then I realized that Live to Tell was a great song, and she had a hit in 1988 with The Look of Love from the Who's That Girl album. Who's That Girl movie that I really liked, and I realized that Madonna actually is a great artist. So I ran down to one afternoon after school. I ran down to the record store we had back then, Tulins, and I bought this album. So I've been listening to it many times through my childhood and even up in the ages. It's definitely an album filled with hits. White Heat is a great song that should have been made as a single. This is a great album actually, even though the title track is maybe the weakest song on the album, but the album itself is a great one. A band that I think has been sadly forgotten. There are a lot of sadly forgotten bands from the 80s, but one that I definitely think is very sadly forgotten, maybe because their albums are so great. It's Australian band Pseudo Echo. Unfortunately, this is a cutout, but the album itself is definitely a masterpiece. Pseudo Echo are most famous for their version of Funky Town, Lips Inc. song from 1980. This album is also mainly the same, sounds pretty much like that song also, but it's filled with great pop melodies with a little rock in the edges and very danceable, awesome production. I really like Brian Cannon's voice actually, and the single prior Funky Town, Living in a Dream, great single. The opening track, A Beat for You, is also a great song. Listening, the third single. This is definitely a great album. Love and Adventure is the title of the album, and it's highly recommended if you like great 80s pop music that sounds a little bit tougher. I'm going to show some Swedish 80s pop records also. To give you a little hint of what was great music here in my country during that era. The interesting thing is that Swedish music always has been having a little bit of been seen as a little shameful here in Sweden. Strange how the Swedes always tend to look to the 80s as something that they feel ashamed about. But the music of the 80s is very underestimated here in Sweden, and of course, if you look at how much Swedish music was selling during the 80s, then of course we don't have much to go with. Europe, Roxette, and in the early 80s, ABBA. But if you look at the quality of the music, then we have so much that has been totally forgotten. And I'm going to show you some of them. This is a band that I liked that I have discovered very recently, and I like very, very much. It is a band that plays a little tougher rock music, you might call it new wave alternative rock music in Swedish. Commando and Pig. Commando and Pig is a band that plays rock music with a little punk in the 80s. I don't like punk at all, but I like Commando and Pig very, very much. And M-Pig, of course, is short for Musse Pig. They call themselves Commando Musse Pig from the beginning, and Musse Pig is a Swedish word for Mickey Mouse. But Walt Disney wasn't too happy about that, so they were forced to shorten the name to M-Pig. This album, Mot Stjärnorna, is definitely one of the best albums they've released. The song Intima Teatern is highly recommended. I like Eva Sunesson, the singer, her voice. She has a great Swedish rock voice. I like their little thoughtful lyrics that you have to think a little bit to get into. They didn't sell all that much in Sweden. Their songs aren't all that commercial, so they didn't sell all that much. So their albums are a little expensive when you find them, but it's definitely worth every penny. Moving on to show a bit of new wave synth pop music from Sweden during the 80s. This is a band that I mentioned in a previous vinyl update when I showed the CD with Mauro Scocco. This is the band he became famous in, Ratata, and the album Mellan dröm och verklighet, between dream and reality. And this is an album that are filled with great 80s pop music, and I really like the lyrics. The lyrics are filled with much broken heart, but Mauro Scocco sings those lyrics so well and that you really believe him when you hear him, actually. And the really great, well-made lyrics. It's a great album. This also contains a duet with Frida from ABBA called Så länge vi har varann. Was a pretty huge hit in Sweden in 1987. So this is a great album from a great band. Another band in the Swedish synth-pop era that was pretty big was this band, Lustans Lakejer, with the singer Johan Kinde. Lustans Lakejer had a very special gimmick. They were singing a lot about going into the night and partying and with champagne and diamonds and luxury and romance and a little James Bondish style, actually. You might think that is a little cheesy gimmick, actually, but they did that so well, actually, so they became very famous for it, and the lyrics are very well written and extremely well produced also, this album, Uppdrag i Genève. Sounds a little bit of ABC sometimes, maybe a little OMD, early Ultravox also very much. So they have been listening very much to British new wave music from the early 80s when they did this. And you might say that they actually brought the synth pop music into Sweden actually. So this is a highly recommended album. It sounds like, hey, a great band. This band is a band that are a little hard to find actually on the Swedish market in the Swedish record stores. This is a band called Fake. It is a band that also sadly forgotten today. This is their album New Art from 1984, and also does very much new wave synth pop music. This is their singer Ulrika Örn, great singer actually. She became famous from a Swedish movie called Gia from the beginning, but then were transformed into a singer. And the other singer is Erik Strömblad, and they sing very well together, very well together, and especially in a song called Arabian Toys that breathes very much ABC actually in the production. So I was told by someone, by a person I knew before, that Fake albums were very expensive on the market. I don't know that, but I know that they're very hard to find actually. There are their biggest hit singles, of course, the ballad Memories of Pan, but especially the single Brick, awesome 80s track, one of the best Swedish 80s track ever. Those ones are okay, pretty easy to find, but their other singles are very hard to find in the record stores. So, but it's worth actually to do a search for it, because it is a sadly forgotten but great synth pop band. Finally, I'm going to show a band that also are sadly forgotten, maybe even more sadly forgotten today, that I'm a huge fan of. Unfortunately, they only released 2 albums, and unfortunately this sleeve doesn't look all that well, but the music is awesome. I'm talking about a band called Nina letar UFO. Translated it is Nina searching for UFO. With a strange name, but the band is fantastic. As I said, they only released 2 albums, and this is their debut, their self-titled debut. Nina letar UFO plays a little Swedish pop music with a little rock in the edges, singing Swedish. And I really love the singer Malin Verne. She has a great voice that has a little rock in it, but also a great pop voice. Really like her voice. I like their thoughtful lyrics that like pretty much like Commando and Pig, lyrics that makes you listen very careful to get into them. And it's marvelous produced, and I think it's very relaxing rock music, relaxing pop rock music actually. Unfortunately, they never made it to Swedish hit charts either. So they became sadly forgotten. And I think they're only famous for this guy, the drummer, Lars-Yngve Vasa Johansson, who became more famous in the 90s when he formed a pop band called Pontus Americana. So also great 80s band. So I hope I shown you a little bit of Swedish music, and given some example that Swedish 80s music weren't just rock set in Europe. And with that, I hope to return soon with another clip, and to show some soul musics soon. So until next time, I hope you have a very nice weekend, and so long.